Ethan Carter was a simple human engineer who lived on a small mining colony at the edge of human space. The colony was quiet most days. Nothing exciting ever happened there. People woke up, worked in the mines, fixed machines, and hoped one day they could move to a better world. Ethan never expected his life to change, and he definitely never expected the sky above the colony to suddenly fill with enormous alien warships. It started as a small dark shadow moving across the stars, then another and another, until the entire sky looked like it was covered by giant metal mountains floating in space. Alarms began screaming across the colony. People ran into the streets looking up in fear. No one had ever seen ships that big before, and everyone knew one thing immediately. These ships did not belong to humans. Ethan stood outside the engineering station staring upward, his heart beating faster with every second. The alien ships were silent, powerful, and completely still, like giant predators waiting for the perfect moment to move. The colony governor quickly sent a message to Earth, but deep down, everyone already knew help would never arrive in time. Then the message came. A massive holographic image appeared above the colony center, showing a tall alien figure wearing dark armor and a silver crown-like helmet. His voice was calm, but carried enough power to silence the entire colony. "Humans of the outer colony," the alien said slowly. "According to the ancient treaty between our empire and your species, we have come to claim the final condition of that agreement." The people of the colony looked at each other in confusion. No one knew about any treaty. The governor stepped forward and demanded an explanation, but the alien commander ignored him. "The treaty requires a union between our people," the alien continued. "One human male will be chosen to marry one of our women." For several seconds, the entire colony was silent. People thought they had heard the message wrong. Marry an alien. It sounded impossible, almost like a strange joke. But the alien fleet outside the planet made it clear that this was not a joke at all. The colony computer began scanning through the population records, selecting a name randomly as part of the treaty rules. Ethan stood quietly among the crowd, hoping the system would choose anyone else. Then the large screen in the colony center suddenly displayed a single name. Ethan Carter. His stomach dropped instantly. People around him slowly turned to look at him, some with shock, others with sympathy. Ethan raised his hands nervously, shaking his head. "There must be a mistake," he said quietly. But a bright beam of blue light suddenly appeared from the sky, surrounding him before he could even move. A moment later, Ethan felt the ground disappear beneath his feet, and the colony vanished below him. When the light faded, Ethan found himself standing inside a massive alien warship. The room was enormous, filled with tall armored soldiers and strange glowing machines. None of them looked friendly. At the far end of the room stood a single alien woman. She was taller than any human. Her skin had a soft silver glow, and her long dark hair flowed behind her like a shadow in zero gravity. Her eyes were calm and powerful, almost royal. This was Lyra, the woman Ethan had been chosen to marry. She looked at him silently for several seconds. Studying him carefully, Ethan expected anger or disgust, but her face showed nothing at all, only quiet control. "Human Ethan Carter," she said softly, her voice smooth and clear. "You will stand beside me during the ceremony." "That's it," Ethan replied nervously. "That's the explanation." Lyra did not answer his question. She simply turned and walked toward a large circular chamber. Alien soldiers immediately moved aside to clear the path for her. Ethan followed slowly, still confused and terrified, but something strange began to bother him as they walked through the ship. Every alien soldier they passed stopped moving and lowered their heads when Lyra walked by. Even the powerful commanders stepped aside respectfully. No one dared to look directly at her. Ethan leaned slightly toward one of the nearby soldiers and whispered quietly, "Why is everyone acting like that around her?" The soldier froze for a moment, but said nothing. Soon they reached a massive ceremonial hall filled with alien officers. Glowing symbols appeared in the air as the strange wedding ceremony began. Ethan barely understood anything that was happening, but he could feel hundreds of alien eyes watching him carefully. Then something strange happened again. One officer leaned closer to another and whispered something quietly, but Ethan still managed to hear a small part of the sentence. Does the human even know who she really is? Ethan looked toward Lyra again, confusion filling his mind, because suddenly one thought refused to leave his head. What if this alien woman was not just an ordinary citizen? And before the story continues, if you enjoy sci-fi stories like this one, gently consider subscribing to the channel so you do not miss the next parts of this adventure. As the ceremony lights grew brighter around them, Ethan slowly realized something terrifying. He had not just married an alien woman. He may have just married the most powerful woman in the entire galaxy. The strange ceremony ended as quickly as it had begun. Glowing alien symbols slowly faded from the air, and the massive chamber fell silent again. Ethan Carter stood still for a moment, trying to understand what had just happened. Only an hour ago, he had been repairing mining equipment on a quiet colony. And now, he had somehow become the husband of an alien woman aboard one of the most powerful warships he had ever seen. Lyra stood beside him calmly, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Her silver eyes moved across the chamber with quiet confidence. The alien officers around them immediately lowered their heads again in respect. Ethan noticed it once more. The reaction was not normal respect for a noble or commander. It looked more like fear mixed with deep loyalty. "Follow me," Lyra said softly, turning toward a long corridor that stretched deep into the ship. Ethan hesitated for a second, but quickly followed behind her. Two tall armored guards walked several steps behind them. Their footsteps echoed through the metal hallway. The ship itself looked like a floating city, glowing walls, strange doors that opened without touching them, and silent alien soldiers moving quickly through the corridors. As they walked, Ethan could not stop thinking about the whispers he had heard during the ceremony. The question kept repeating inside his mind. Does the human even know who she really is? He glanced toward Lyra again. She walked calmly with perfect posture, her long dark hair moving gently behind her, as if gravity itself respected her presence. Ethan finally gathered the courage to speak. "So, are you going to explain any of this?" Ethan asked carefully. "Or am I just supposed to accept that I was kidnapped and married in the same hour?" Lyra slowed slightly, but did not stop walking. "The marriage was required," she replied calmly. "It was the safest solution for now." "For who?" Ethan asked immediately. "Because it definitely does not feel very safe for me." For the first time, Lyra looked directly at him. Her silver eyes studied his face as if she was measuring something inside him. But after a moment, she simply continued walking. "You will not be harmed," she said quietly. "No one on this ship will touch you." Ethan almost laughed nervously at that sentence, considering the thousands of armed aliens surrounding him. But something in her voice sounded completely certain. Soon they reached a large door made of dark metal covered in glowing alien symbols. The guard stopped outside while Lyra stepped forward. The door opened silently, revealing a massive chamber that looked more like a royal living area than a normal room. Large windows showed endless stars outside. Soft lights floated in the air, and strange alien plants grew along the walls. "This will be your living area," Lyra said. Ethan walked inside slowly, looking around in shock. The room was larger than his entire apartment back on the colony. "You expect me to live here?" he asked. "Yes," Lyra replied simply. Ethan turned toward her again, his mind still racing with questions. "You said the marriage was required," he said slowly. "But required by who? And why does everyone on this ship act like you are the most important person in the universe?" For a moment, Lyra said nothing. Her face remained calm, but Ethan noticed a small change in her expression, like someone carefully hiding a secret. "You ask many questions," she said quietly. "Well," Ethan answered quickly, "that usually happens when someone is forced into an intergalactic marriage." For a second, Lyra almost looked amused, but the expression disappeared quickly. "There are many things you do not understand about our empire," she said. "For now, it is better if you simply remain safe and stay here." That answer only made Ethan more suspicious. But before he could speak again, a loud alarm suddenly echoed through the ship corridors outside. Red lights flashed across the walls, and several alien officers rushed past the doorway. Lyra immediately turned toward the window, her calm expression suddenly becoming sharp and focused. "What is happening?" Ethan asked nervously. Lyra walked toward a control panel near the window and activated a holographic display showing the space around the warship. Dozens of smaller ships were moving rapidly near the fleet. Their designs looked different from the Imperial ships surrounding them. "Pirates," Lyra said quietly. The word alone made Ethan uncomfortable. Space pirates attacking a fleet this massive sounded completely insane, but the battle had already started. Bright flashes of energy lit up the dark space outside as weapons fired between ships. Ethan watched the display closely. Several alien fighters launched from the warship, racing toward the attackers at incredible speed. For the first time since meeting her, Ethan noticed something change in Lyra's behavior. Her calm voice became stronger, more commanding. "Deploy defensive squadrons," she said into the communication system. "Protect the civilian carriers." Almost instantly, dozens of officers across the ship began responding to her orders. Ethan slowly turned toward her in shock, because something about the situation suddenly felt very strange. She had just given orders during a fleet battle, and everyone had obeyed her immediately. No hesitation, no questions. Like her authority was absolute. Ethan stared at her for a long moment before speaking quietly. "You said this marriage was for safety," he said slowly. "But I think there is something you are not telling me." Lyra remained silent as the battle outside continued. Bright explosions lit up the stars beyond the window, and in that moment Ethan became more certain than ever about one thing. His alien wife was hiding something far bigger than he could imagine. And somewhere inside this enormous empire, there was a secret about her that could change the entire galaxy. The battle with the pirates ended faster than Ethan expected. Within minutes, the attacking ships were destroyed or forced to escape into deep space. The alien fleet returned to its silent formation around the capital ship, and the red warning lights inside the vessel slowly faded away. But for Ethan Carter, the situation only became more confusing, because what he had just witnessed raised even more questions about the mysterious woman he had married. Lyra had given commands during the battle, and thousands of alien soldiers had obeyed her instantly. No one questioned her orders. No officer asked for confirmation. They simply listened and acted, and that level of authority was not normal for someone who claimed the marriage was only a political arrangement. Ethan stood near the large observation window, watching damaged pirate ships drifting far away into darkness. The stars looked peaceful again, but his mind was not. Lyra stood behind him quietly. Her calm expression had returned as if the battle had been nothing more than a small interruption. "You handled that like a commander," Ethan said carefully, turning toward her. Lyra looked at the stars instead of answering immediately. "I have experience," she replied softly. "That was more than experience," Ethan said, his voice slightly firmer now. "That was authority, real authority, the kind that makes entire fleets listen without question." Lyra did not respond, and the silence between them slowly grew heavier. Ethan exhaled slowly and turned back toward the window. "You know what the strangest part is?" he continued quietly. "None of those officers looked surprised when you gave orders. They expected it." Lyra finally looked at him again, her silver eyes calm but thoughtful. "You seem more than most humans," she said. "Yeah, well," Ethan answered with a small nervous smile. Being suddenly married to an alien tends to make a person pay attention. But before the conversation could continue, the large door behind them opened suddenly. 3 alien officers entered the chamber. Their armor looked heavier and more decorated than the soldiers Ethan had seen before. They immediately lowered their heads toward Lyra. "My lady," the first officer said respectfully, "the pirate threat has been eliminated." Ethan noticed the words carefully. "My lady." It sounded important, maybe even royal. Lyra nodded slightly. "Good," she said calmly. "Return the fleet to its previous course." "Yes, my lady," the officer replied before all 3 of them left the chamber again. Ethan crossed his arms slowly, staring at the closed door. "Okay," he said after a moment. "Now, I'm definitely sure something strange is happening." Lyra did not deny it, but she also did not explain anything. Over the next several days, Ethan slowly began learning more about life inside the alien fleet. The ship was enormous, filled with thousands of crew members from many different alien worlds. Powerful technology controlled every system, and strict military discipline guided everything that happened on board. But the strangest part remained the way everyone treated Lyra. Wherever she walked, soldiers stepped aside immediately. Officers lowered their heads, and even high commanders spoke to her with careful respect, sometimes even fear. Ethan noticed something else as well. Not everyone seemed happy about his presence. Some alien officers looked at him with curiosity, others with open dislike. Whispers often followed him through the corridors, especially among the higher-ranking nobles of the Empire. One afternoon, Ethan entered a large training chamber where several alien soldiers practiced combat exercises. The room felt strangely quiet when he walked in. Conversation stopped, and several warriors stared at him openly. Two officers stood near the far wall, speaking in low voices. But their words slowly became louder as the discussion grew more heated. "A human," one of them said with clear anger. "This is an insult to the Empire." "The decision was not yours to question," the second officer replied carefully. "It should be," the first one answered sharply. "Our people rule half the galaxy, and now a weak human stands beside her." Ethan pretended not to hear them, but the words still reached him clearly. Weak human. Before the argument could continue further, the large door behind them opened again, and the entire room instantly fell silent. Lyra entered calmly. Her presence alone seemed to freeze every soldier in place. The two officers who had been arguing quickly lowered their heads, but Ethan noticed something important. One of them looked angry, even while showing respect. Lyra walked across the room slowly until she stopped beside Ethan. "Training well?" she asked the soldiers calmly. "Yes, my lady," they all answered together. But the angry officer stepped forward slightly, his armor decorated with dark red markings that Ethan had never seen before. "Permission to speak," he said. Lyra looked at him silently for a moment. "Granted," she replied. The officer raised his head. His eyes briefly glanced toward Ethan with clear disapproval. "The Empire has always valued strength," he said carefully. "Many officers believe the recent marriage may cause concern among the noble houses." The room became very quiet again. Every soldier understood what he was really saying. The officer's name appeared on a small display near his armor. "Commander Vexer." Lyra's expression did not change, but her voice became slightly colder. "The Empire values loyalty above all," she answered. Vexer lowered his head again, but the tension in the room did not disappear. "As you command," he replied, though his tone suggested he was far from satisfied. After he left the chamber, Ethan looked toward Lyra again. "That guy really hates me," Ethan said quietly. Lyra watched the closed door for a moment before answering. "Commander Vexer believes humans are inferior," she said. "Well," Ethan sighed, "that makes two of us then." Lyra almost smiled again, but her eyes quickly returned to their calm, serious expression. What Ethan did not realize yet was that Commander Vexer had already started planning something dangerous, something that could destroy the fragile balance inside the Empire. Because in the shadows of the fleet, powerful nobles were beginning to whisper the same question again and again. Why had Lyra chosen a human? And if that human continued to gain influence inside the Empire, then perhaps he would need to disappear. The tension inside the Imperial fleet slowly grew stronger with each passing day. Ethan Carter could feel it even when no one spoke about it directly. Whispers followed him through the corridors. Officers stopped talking when he entered a room, and the strange looks from certain nobles made it clear that his presence aboard the ship was becoming a problem. Lyra, however, remained calm, as always. She continued moving through the fleet with quiet confidence, giving orders when necessary and observing everything around her with careful attention. But Ethan noticed something else about her behavior. Sometimes she disappeared for long periods without explanation, and when she returned, her expression always looked more serious than before. One evening, Ethan was walking through a quiet section of the ship when he realized he had taken a wrong turn. The corridor looked different from the areas he usually visited. The walls were darker, the lights softer, and very few soldiers were present. He turned a corner and suddenly noticed a large door slightly open at the end of the hallway. Soft golden light spilled out into the corridor, and strange glowing symbols decorated the doorway, symbols he had never seen anywhere else on the ship. Curiosity slowly pulled him closer. Ethan stepped quietly toward the door and looked inside. The chamber beyond was enormous, far larger than any room he had seen on the ship before. Tall banners hung from the ceiling, each one displaying a powerful alien symbol glowing with silver light. And at the center of the room stood a large circular table surrounded by several high-ranking officers. Ethan quickly recognized some of them as fleet commanders, powerful nobles who controlled entire star systems. But what truly surprised him was the way they were standing. Every single officer had their head lowered in deep respect. And standing at the center of the chamber was Lyra. She looked different in this room, stronger, more commanding. Her calm expression now carried an authority that filled the entire space around her. The outer systems remain unstable. One general said carefully, several noble houses are questioning the recent decision. Lyra listened silently before answering. The stability of the Empire is my responsibility, she said calmly, not theirs. Ethan felt his heart begin to race. Her responsibility. The words echoed in his mind as the conversation continued. Another officer stepped forward slowly. Your Majesty, he said respectfully. Commander Vexer has been speaking with several noble houses. We believe he is attempting to build support against the marriage. Ethan froze completely outside the doorway. Your Majesty. The words struck him like a shockwave. Inside the chamber, Lyra remained calm, but her eyes grew slightly colder. Vexer underestimates the situation, she said quietly. He believes the Empire will never accept a human beside the throne. The officer continued carefully. Lyra turned slowly toward the large star map glowing above the table. Thousands of star systems filled the holographic display, showing the enormous size of the Empire she controlled. The Empire does not need acceptance, she said softly. It needs stability. Ethan felt his entire world shift in that moment. The whispers he had heard during the ceremony, the way soldiers bowed when Lyra walked by, the instant obedience during the pirate attack. It all suddenly made sense. Lyra was not just an important officer or noble. She was the ruler of the entire Empire, the Queen of the Galaxy. Ethan stepped back from the door slowly, his mind spinning with disbelief, but before he could leave the corridor of the chamber, doors suddenly opened wider. Lyra stood there looking directly at him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she gestured quietly for him to enter. The generals inside the chamber immediately looked surprised when Ethan walked in, but none of them questioned Lyra's decision. They simply stepped aside respectfully. The room slowly emptied until only Ethan and Lyra remained beside the glowing star map. Ethan stared at her for several long seconds before finally speaking. So, he said slowly, Your Majesty. Lyra's expression remained calm, but she looked slightly disappointed that he had discovered the truth this way. You were not meant to learn like this, she said quietly. Well, Ethan replied nervously. It is a little difficult to ignore an entire room calling my wife the Queen of the Galaxy. For a moment, Lyra said nothing. She simply looked out toward the stars beyond the large window behind the map. Yes, she finally admitted softly. I'm the ruler of the Imperial Galaxy. Ethan laughed, once in disbelief, rubbing his face with both hands. This is insane, he muttered. A week ago, I was fixing mining drills. Now I find out I accidentally married the most powerful woman in the universe. Lyra turned toward him again, her silver eyes serious now. It was not an accident, she said quietly. Ethan slowly lowered his hands. What do you mean? He asked. Lyra stepped closer to the star map. Her hand moved across the glowing systems of the Empire. For many years, the noble houses have grown too powerful, she explained. They compete with each other, they manipulate politics, and they hide their true ambitions. And marrying a random human fixes that. Ethan asked skeptically. Lyra looked directly at him. You were not random, she said calmly. Ethan blinked in surprise. You chose me, he said slowly. Yes, Lyra answered. The room became silent again as Ethan tried to understand what she was saying. You needed someone outside the Empire, he guessed. Someone the noble houses could not control, Lyra replied. Ethan leaned back against the table, still processing the situation. So let me understand this, he said carefully. You started a political storm across the galaxy by marrying a human engineer from a mining colony. Lyra's expression softened slightly. Not just any human, she said quietly. Before Ethan could ask another question, an alarm suddenly echoed through the chamber again, louder than before, urgent and dangerous. A communication officer's voice filled the room. Emergency report, the voice announced. Multiple fleets are mobilizing in the outer systems. Ethan looked toward Lyra in confusion, but Lyra already understood what it meant. Commander Vexer had begun moving his forces. The rebellion inside the Empire had just begun, and now the entire galaxy would soon learn one dangerous truth. The Queen had chosen a human husband, and many powerful enemies were ready to start a war to stop it. The news of the mobilizing fleets spread across the Imperial ship like a silent storm. Officers moved quickly through the corridors, communication channels filled with urgent reports, and the comm order that Ethan had slowly gotten used to began to disappear. Something serious was happening across the Empire, and everyone on the ship seemed to understand and accept him. Ethan stood inside the strategy chamber beside Lyra, staring at the giant holographic map floating in the center of the room. Several star systems were now glowing red. Warning signals appeared around the outer edges of the Empire. Fleets were moving, alliances were forming, and it was clear that the political tension inside the Empire had finally started turning into something much more dangerous. This is because of me, isn't it? Ethan said quietly, watching the map. Lyra shook her head slowly. No, she replied calmly. This was coming long before you arrived. But the marriage pushed them, Ethan insisted. Lyra looked toward him with a calm but firm expression. The marriage revealed who our enemies already were, she said. Commander Vexer and the noble houses supporting him were always planning something. They simply waited for the right moment. Ethan leaned against the table slightly, exhaling slowly as he tried to process the situation. The idea that entire alien fleets were preparing for war because of the strange marriage still felt impossible. Before he could ask another question, a communication officer rushed into the chamber. My lady, the officer said urgently, the diplomatic gathering has been confirmed. Lyra nodded slightly. Prepare the fleet, she ordered. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Diplomatic gathering, he repeated, during the start of a possible rebellion. The noble houses have requested a meeting, Lyra explained calmly. They wish to discuss the future of the Empire. Ethan gave a small, nervous laugh. That sounds like the most dangerous meeting in the galaxy. Lyra did not disagree. Several hours later, the Imperial fleet arrived near a massive floating station located between several important star systems. The station was enormous, almost the size of a small moon, and dozens of alien warships from different noble houses surrounded it like silent guardians. Ethan stood near the large observation window as their ships slowly approached the station. He could see many different alien designs among the fleets outside. Some ships were sharp and aggressive. Others were elegant and smooth, but all of them carried powerful weapons. So these are the noble houses that might start a war, Ethan said quietly. Yes, Lyra replied, standing beside him. The docking procedure began, and soon Ethan found himself walking through the massive halls of the diplomatic station. Lyra walked beside him with the same calm confidence she always carried, but the atmosphere inside the station felt tense. Guards stood at every corner. Officers watched each other carefully, and quiet conversation stopped whenever Lyra passed by. The meeting chamber itself was enormous. Tall pillars reached toward the ceiling, and a massive circular table filled the center of the room. Powerful nobles from across the Empire had already gathered there, each one representing fleets, armies, and entire worlds. When Lyra entered the chamber, Every noble slowly stood and lowered their heads in respect, but Ethan could still feel the tension in the air. Respect did not mean loyalty. Commander Vexer stood among the nobles. His dark armor made him easy to recognize. His eyes briefly moved toward Ethan with cold hostility before returning to Lyra. The meeting began with calm, diplomatic discussions. Several nobles spoke about stability, alliances, and the future of the Empire, but beneath their polite words, Ethan could feel the real conflict growing stronger. And suddenly something changed. A small metallic sound echoed behind Ethan, almost too quiet to notice. His instincts reacted before his mind did. Ethan turned just in time to see one of the station guards raising a strange alien weapon directly toward him. Everything happened in seconds. The weapon fired with a sharp flash of blue energy. Ethan barely managed to move as the energy blast struck the floor beside him, sending sparks across the chamber. Nobles shouted in shock, guards rushed forward, and the entire room exploded into chaos. More attackers suddenly appeared from different sides of the chamber, their armor disguised to look like station security. "Protect the Queen," several soldiers shouted. Ethan dove behind one of the large pillars as another energy blast hit the wall behind him. The attackers were not aiming randomly. Their target was clear. They were trying to kill him. Across the chamber, Lyra stood completely still for a brief moment, her silver eyes burning with controlled fury. Then something changed. The calm and mysterious woman Ethan had known disappeared. In her place stood the true ruler of the Empire. Her voice echoed across the entire chamber with unstoppable authority. "Guards," she commanded sharply, "seal the station and capture the attackers." Her words carried such power that every soldier in the room reacted instantly. Imperial guards moved with perfect coordination, surrounding the attackers within seconds. Energy weapons fired across the chamber as the assassins tried desperately to escape. Ethan remained behind the pillar, breathing heavily as he watched the battle unfold. The attackers fought fiercely, but they were completely outnumbered. Within moments, the last assassin fell to the ground. The chamber finally fell silent again, except for the sound of damaged equipment and distant alarms. Lyra walked slowly toward Ethan, her expression still cold with anger. "Are you injured?" she asked calmly. Ethan shook his head quickly, still shocked by the sudden attack. "I think someone at this meeting really does not like me," he said nervously. Across the chamber, several guards dragged one of the surviving assassins forward, forcing him to kneel in front of Lyra. The prisoner looked terrified, but before anyone could question him, he suddenly laughed weakly. "You think killing the human will save the Empire," he said quietly. Ethan felt a chill run through him as the man continued speaking. "The noble houses will never accept a human beside the throne," the assassin said. Lyra looked down at him silently. Then her voice became cold and absolute. "The Empire will accept what I command," she said. Across the station, news of the attack was already spreading quickly. Nobles whispered in shock. Officers exchanged worried glances, and one truth became clear to everyone present. Someone powerful had just attempted to assassinate the Queen's human husband, and that act had officially turned the growing political conflict into open rebellion. Somewhere within the station, Commander Vexer watched the chaos unfold with quiet satisfaction, because the first move in his plan had already been made, and the next step would push the entire galaxy closer to war. The assassination attempt changed everything across the Empire. What had once been quiet political tension now turned into open conflict spreading across the stars. Messages flooded through the Imperial communication networks. Fleets began moving between systems, and entire noble houses started choosing sides. Within days, the galaxy that once stood united under a single throne began to fracture, and the name of the conflict slowly spread across every world. The Imperial Civil War had begun. Ethan Carter watched it all unfold from the bridge of Lyra's capital ship. The massive holographic map in front of him now looked very different from before. Dozens of star systems glowed red as rebel forces captured strategic locations. Powerful noble houses declared their independence, and Commander Vexor's influence spread quickly among fleets that already doubted the Queen's decisions. "I never imagined a marriage could start something like this," Ethan said quietly as he studied the map. Lyra stood beside him with the same calm posture she always carried, but this time there was a sharp focus in her silver eyes. "The war was coming long before you," she said softly. "The empire had grown too large, too divided. The nobles only needed an excuse to reveal their ambitions." Ethan nodded slowly, though the guilt still sat heavily in his chest. "Still feels like I gave them the perfect excuse," he replied. Lyra turned slightly toward him. "You gave them a reason to show themselves," she corrected calmly. Across the bridge, dozens of officers worked quickly at their stations. Starship commanders reported fleet movements. Analysts studied enemy strategies, and long lines of alien warships filled the space around them. The loyal fleets of the Empire were gathering for the coming battles. Then one of the navigation officers spoke up urgently. "My lady, new report from the outer systems," the officer said. "Commander Vexor's forces have captured 3 additional star gates. Their fleets are expanding rapidly." The star map immediately updated. Several glowing routes connected the rebel-controlled systems, showing how quickly the rebellion was spreading across the galaxy. Ethan crossed his arms as he studied the display carefully. "That guy moves fast," he said. "Vexor is a skilled commander," Lyra replied. Ethan leaned closer to the map. Thinking carefully, something about the pattern of the rebel fleet movements caught his attention. They were not attacking randomly. Their forces were spreading along certain travel routes between star systems, slowly building a network of controlled space. "Wait," Ethan said suddenly, pointing toward the display. Several officers turned to look at him with curiosity. "What do you see?" Lyra asked. Ethan traced a line across several star systems glowing red on the map. "He's not just taking territory," Ethan explained. "He's building a wall." The officers exchanged confused looks, but Lyra remained focused on the map. "Explain," she said calmly. "If Vexor controls all these systems," Ethan continued, "he blocks travel between the Central Empire and the outer colonies. He cuts your supply lines and isolates your fleets." The officers quickly began analyzing the idea, their screens filled with calculations and travel simulations. One of the strategists looked up in surprise. "The human is correct," the officer said. "If the rebels capture 2 more systems along this route, half of the loyal fleets will be trapped beyond the barrier." Lyra studied the map silently for several seconds before speaking again. "Then we cannot allow that to happen," she said firmly. Within hours, the Imperial fleet began moving again. Dozens of warships jumped through hyperspace toward the threatened systems. Ethan watched from the bridge window as enormous fleets assembled around them like shining metal storms ready for battle. Soon they arrived at one of the key systems Vexor needed to complete his blockade. The moment their fleet appeared, the enemy ships were already waiting. Hundreds of rebel warships filled the dark space around the nearby star, their weapons glowing with charged energy. The battle began almost immediately. Bright beams of energy crossed the battlefield as fleets collided in the darkness. Explosions lit up the stars like violent flashes of lightning. Fighter squadrons raced between the larger ships, and the bridge filled with rapid reports from every direction. Ethan held onto the command railing as the massive ship shook from distant impacts. This was no small pirate attack like before. This was a full-scale war between 2 powerful forces. "Enemy cruisers approaching from the eastern sector," one officer reported. "Deploy defensive formations," another commander shouted. Lyra remained completely calm at the center of the bridge, her voice steady and clear as she directed the battle. But even with her leadership, the situation quickly became dangerous. The rebel fleet was larger than expected, and their ships moved aggressively through the battlefield, slowly pushing the loyal forces back. Ethan watched the chaotic battle carefully, his mind racing as he tried to understand the movements of both fleets. Something about the rebel attack pattern looked predictable. Their ships kept pushing toward the same point again and again, trying to break through the defensive line in one specific area. "They're trying to split the fleet," Ethan said suddenly. Lyra glanced toward him briefly. Your reasoning? She asked. Ethan pointed toward the tactical display. If they break through here, he explained, your fleets lose communication with each other, then they surround the smaller groups and destroy them one by one. The officers quickly ran the scenario through their simulations again, and the result appeared almost immediately. He's right again, the strategist reported. The rebel formation predicts a division in 14 minutes. Lyra's eyes focused on the display. Then we change the battle, she said calmly. She turned slightly toward Ethan. What would a human commander do? She asked. Ethan blinked in surprise. You want my plan? He said. Yes, Lyra replied simply. Ethan studied the map one more time before answering. Humans don't always fight fair, he said with a small smile. A few minutes later, the Imperial fleet suddenly changed formation. Several ships intentionally retreated, creating the illusion of weakness in the exact location Vexor's fleet had been targeting. The rebel ships rushed forward to exploit the opening, believing victory was finally within reach. But the moment they advanced into the gap, hidden Imperial cruisers appeared from hyperspace behind them, cutting off their escape routes and surrounding the attacking fleet completely. Within minutes, the battlefield shifted dramatically. The rebel forces that had been pushing forward now found themselves trapped between two powerful groups of Imperial warships. Explosions filled the darkness as the trapped rebel ships were quickly overwhelmed. The remaining enemy vessels began retreating across the system, abandoning their attack. Cheers echoed across the bridge as officers realized the battle had turned in their favor. The rebel fleet is retreating, one officer announced. Ethan exhaled slowly, finally relaxing his grip on the railing. Well, he said quietly, that worked better than I expected. Several officers now looked at him with completely different expressions than before. The same human many of them once considered weak had just helped them win a major battle. Lyra turned toward him again, her silver eyes filled with quiet approval. Your species has interesting strategies, she said calmly. Ethan smiled slightly. Humans are good at surprising people, he replied. Across the galaxy, news of the battle spread quickly. The Empire had won an important victory, and many officers began speaking about the strange human who had helped change the battle. A new nickname slowly started spreading through the fleet, whispered among soldiers and commanders alike. The human strategist. But far away in another system, Commander Vexor watched the reports from the battlefield with cold anger. He had underestimated the human once. He would not make that mistake again, because the next battle he planned would not be a simple fleet engagement. It would be the final strike, meant to end the war and destroy the Queen's empire forever. The victory in the previous battle gave the Imperial fleet new confidence, but everyone understood that the war was far from over. Commander Vexor still controlled many powerful fleets, and his influence among the rebellious noble houses continued to grow stronger. Across the galaxy, entire systems remained under rebel control. Trade routes were disrupted, and millions of citizens waited anxiously to see who would win the civil war that now threatened the future of the Empire. On the bridge of the Imperial flagship, Ethan Carter stood quietly beside the massive star map. The glowing display now showed the final stage of the conflict. Almost every major rebel fleet had gathered in a single location near the Imperial capital system. It was clear that Vexor was preparing one last decisive battle. If he wins this fight, Ethan said slowly, studying the map, the Empire collapses. Lyra nodded calmly beside him. The capital system holds the political heart of the Empire, she explained. If Vexor captures it, many remaining systems will surrender immediately. Ethan crossed his arms, thinking carefully as he looked at the glowing fleets moving slowly across the map. So he's betting everything on one final attack, he said. Yes, Lyra replied quietly. Around them, the bridge officers worked non-stop, preparing the fleet for the coming battle. Hundreds of Imperial warships were gathering near the capital. Massive defensive stations powered up their weapons, and long lines of supply ships arrived from loyal systems. The entire Empire was preparing for what might become the largest space battle in its history. Hours later, the Imperial fleet finally arrived, near the capital system. The moment their ships exited hyperspace, Ethan immediately understood how serious the situation was. The rebel fleet was enormous. Thousands of warships filled the dark space around the capital star like a metal storm waiting to explode. Massive battleships, heavy cruisers, and countless fighter squadrons floated in tight formation under Vexor's command. Ethan let out a quiet breath as he looked through the giant bridge window. "That's a lot of ships," he said nervously. Lyra remained calm, as always, though her eyes showed the sharp focus of a leader preparing for the most important moment of her rule. "Vexor believes this battle will end the war," she said softly. "And he might be right," Ethan replied honestly. The two massive fleets slowly moved closer together in the silent darkness. Communication signals attempted one last negotiation between both sides, but everyone already knew peace was impossible now. Then suddenly the rebel fleet opened fire. Thousands of energy beams crossed the darkness at once. The battle erupted instantly. Explosions lit up the entire system as warships from both sides clashed with overwhelming force. Fighter squadrons rushed forward in waves. Heavy cruisers launched powerful missiles, and the capital defenses joined the battle from orbit around the nearby planet. Ethan held tightly onto the command railing as the flagship shook from distant impacts. The scale of the battle was almost impossible to understand. Everywhere he looked, ships were fighting, maneuvering, exploding, or retreating. But something quickly became clear. Vexor had brought more ships than expected. Even with the capital defenses and loyal fleets, the Imperial forces were slowly losing ground. Enemy reinforcements arriving from the outer edge of the system. One officer reported urgently. The star map updated again, showing additional rebel fleets joining the battle. Ethan felt a cold realization forming in his mind. "If this continues," he said quietly, "they will overwhelm us." Lyra watched the battle silently, but the tension on the bridge began growing stronger as officers realized the same thing. Then Ethan suddenly noticed something unusual on the tactical display. A small group of rebel command ships remained far behind the main battlefield, protected by heavy escorts. "That must be Vexor," Ethan said, pointing toward the distant formation. "Yes," Lyra confirmed. Ethan stared at the display carefully, his mind racing through possibilities. "Everything in this battle depends on him," he said slowly. "Correct," Lyra replied. Ethan leaned closer to the map, studying the positions of both fleets. The rebel ships were tightly coordinated around Vexor's commands. Every movement followed his orders perfectly. And suddenly an idea appeared in Ethan's mind. "What if we remove the commander?" he said quietly. Several officers turned toward him. Lyra looked at him carefully. "You propose striking directly at Vexor," she said. "Not with the entire fleet," Ethan replied quickly. "That would take too long, but if we send a fast strike group through this gap here," he pointed toward a small opening between rebel formations, "they could reach his command ships before he realizes what's happening." The officers quickly analyzed the plan. Their computers ran the battle simulations at incredible speed. "Probability of success is low," one strategist said. "But if successful, the rebel fleet will lose central coordination." Lyra looked at the map for several seconds before making her decision. "Prepare the strike group," she ordered calmly. Within minutes, a group of the fastest Imperial warships separated from the main fleet and rushed toward the narrow opening Ethan had identified. Their engines burned bright as they slipped through the chaotic battlefield, avoiding heavy fighting as they moved directly toward Vexor's hidden command ships. The rebel commander did not notice the attack until it was already too late. Imperial cruisers suddenly emerged from hyperspace directly beside the rebel command formation, opening fire with devastating precision. The battle around Vexor's flagship erupted instantly. Escorts attempted to defend their commander, but the surprise attack had already broken their formation. On the bridge, Ethan watched the distant explosions appear on the star map. "Direct hit on enemy command vessel," one officer shouted. Seconds later, the rebel fleet began reacting strangely. Ships hesitated, formations broke apart, and communication signals across the battlefield suddenly became chaotic. Enemy coordination collapsing, another officer reported. Without Vexor directing the battle, the massive rebel fleet quickly lost its advantage. Some ships attempted to retreat, others continued fighting without clear strategy, and the Imperial forces quickly pushed forward to regain control of the battlefield. Within an hour, the final rebel ships were retreating from the capital system. The civil war had effectively ended. Cheers filled the Imperial flagship as officers realized what had happened. The rebellion was broken. The capital system was safe, and the Empire had survived its greatest threat. Ethan leaned back slowly, exhausted but relieved. "Well," he said quietly, "that was the most stressful day of my life." Lyra turned toward him with a rare warm expression in her eyes. "You changed the outcome of this war," she said calmly. Ethan shrugged slightly. "I just pointed at a few ships on a map," he replied. But across the Empire, the story spread quickly. Citizens on distant worlds heard about the human who helped defeat the rebellion. Soldiers spoke about the strategist who outsmarted Vexor, and nobles who once doubted him now realized something important. The human husband of the queen had helped save the entire galaxy. Several weeks later, in a grand ceremony on the Imperial capital world, millions of citizens watched as Lyra stood before the assembled leaders of the Empire. Beside her stood Ethan Carter, the former engineer from a forgotten mining colony. Lyra's voice echoed across the massive hall as she addressed the galaxy. "The Empire stands united once again," she announced. Then she turned toward Ethan and gently took his hand. "And from this day forward, humanity will stand beside us as equals among the stars." Across the galaxy, a new title began spreading among both humans and aliens alike. Ethan Carter was no longer just a human engineer. He had become a man who changed the fate of an entire galaxy. The Human King.